I mean, how can you not look at this and be like, this is the epitome of like rock and metal musicianship? There is no other way to slice it. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Lone University. In this week's video, it's going to be a long one. I'm going to be analyzing and reacting to Metropolis Part 1, The Miracle in the Sleeper. This is from Dream Theater's landmark progressive album, Images and Words, released back in 1992. This was for sure the album that put them on the map, especially with the release of Pull Me Under, which is kind of arguably the biggest hit song they had. But that album was just full of inspiration. Every player was firing on all cylinders, and I still think they're a fantastic band today with a remarkable legacy for progressive music and just opening up so many doors. But, this was the album that really flipped bass playing on its head for me and really turned me on to John Myung, who really is why I started playing a six-string bass. And I'm kind of a poser now saying that with a five-string here in the video, but I still have one. It's out of frame right here. Nonetheless, let's jump into this performance from 2006. This is the Score DVD. This is their 20th anniversary performance with an orchestra recorded at Radio City Music Hall. I consider this to be just the golden years, prime era of the band. It's sort of when I got into them, when Train of Thought, 6 Degrees were coming out, Octavarium, and they just played a career-spanning set list of some great songs. And I just think this video in particular captures a really great vibe. And after reviewing a couple different ones, this one kind of shows John Myung the most and some of the parts I want to talk about. So without further ado, let's jump in. This is Metropolis Part 1 from 2006, Dream Theater. This is one of those concerts I just really wish I could have been at. I was in 10th grade, though. Obviously, this is back from the Mike Portnoy era. Incredible drummer. Still one of my favorites. I can't imagine the post-production mixing on something like this. Insane. Just the amount of channels, maybe? It's just nuts. Yeah. And this is kind of when John Petrucci started growing his hair back out. I think it's been long ever since, but he obviously cut it at one point. This was kind of that awkward phase. So here they're just establishing that intro theme. It's really heavy. This is kind of what put this band on the map. It's well documented, and this has been said tons of times, but they kind of took like Yes, Rush, King Crimson, kind of wacky, esoteric stuff, and then they had a beautiful marriage with bands like Maiden and Metallica, and this is obviously some of the heavier, kind of Metallica-esque influences. That kind of stuff. Just heavy stuff that you didn't really hear Yes or Rush do. And again, this band opened the doors for so much of today's greatest progressive music, for sure. Love those French horns. Love it. It's a great line. Look at that crowd, man. Yeah, see, you would never hear Yes or Rush, King Crimson even do stuff like this. So, this album was just a pinnacle for progressive metal. Absolutely. The smile I've done, a right to remain. She carried our we're warming up here. We have this intro heavy, kind of in the verses, leaving some space for that vocal line. When I first tried to learn this song, I was like, I can't even play the verse. It's fast. Playing this with 2 fingers on bass, it's kind of weird. It's kind of like playing that breakdown of 1 from Metallica, the da-da-da-da-da, sixlets, da-da-da-da-da, 1 through 1 through 1, that kind of thing. So, and you can see here, John Myung's using that 3-finger technique, which I can't imagine not using my ring finger these days. But, a great way to work that ring finger in, I hear a lot of people tell me in the years of teaching I've done, the ring finger just feels unnatural. I'm so used to using 2. And I always tell people, play your major scales, play basic songs, and just eliminate one of these 2 fingers. So instead of playing, a pop punk song, some easy 8th note stuff, some AC/DC, just say, hey, I'm not going to use my middle finger today, and just try to use the ring finger, so index and ring, if I can do that right. And just tell yourself, from Monday through Friday, I'm not using my middle finger. I'm going to play all the stuff I normally practice, but I'm just going to take away that middle finger. And then the next week, take it up to the really hard version and say, I'm going to take away my index finger and only play songs with middle and ring. And then when you come back to using all 3, it's kind of like, well, I spent all that time with the ring finger. It feels a little more natural. You kind of have to subtract the things that are comfortable and add in the things that are uncomfortable. Otherwise, it's just like a runt pig. It will never get its chance to shine. So if you're trying to learn 3-finger technique, I would just try taking away one of these 2 for a while. That's kind of what I do it. But this is fast, You can do it. I just love that French horn, just that descending line. All right, now here's a part that really blew my mind. Let me see if it shows him playing this. Yeah. This is one of the reasons I kind of chose this video, because some of the other live versions of this just didn't show Myung too much. But if you've listened to the music I've played over the years, I use a lot of bass harmonics. I think it's a beautiful timbre that contrasts very nicely with normal lower bass notes. Obviously, they're way higher pitched, so you can get these really beautiful chords, And this is the kind of stuff that opened me up to that. You'll notice on the verse here, he takes a really creative approach and kind of almost mimics the timbre of the guitar parts, because the guitar parts, if you go back a little bit, you can hear Petrucci just kind of doing some chimey, clean stuff. There's a miracle each day that I try. So the bass is almost kind of complementing that role. So I think the bass line there, without pulling up the tabs and making this a video where I'm showing you how to play Metropolis, from memory, I believe it's kind of, let's see. It's something in that ballpark. I know it's using the harmonics a little before the 4th fret. So you'll notice on a bass, the harmonics are perfectly precise in halfway measurement. So you've got the middle one here that's right in the middle. Then you have this one that he's using here. It's the 4th fret harmonic, so it's the major third. No, I'm sorry. It's the major third of the open string. So I'm on an open G string. And when you see a 4th fret harmonic, if you ever see that in a tablature, just know that it's not actually the 4th fret. It's a little before the 4th fret. Otherwise, it won't ring out. See, if I'm right over the 4th fret, but if you go a little before, so he's kind of making like a kind of a B minor outline. I think he might have that C sharp in there right here. But the hardest part about making a line like this work is you have to really pivot between normal fingerstyle playing, so these bottom notes. But when you pluck a harmonic, you kind of want to pluck like this. If you look down at this other camera, you kind of want to pluck away. And anything I teach with bass playing is you always pluck through the string. So I'm playing this fret 7 on the D string. I'm plucking through it and landing on the string behind it. Harmonics, you don't want to do that because it kind of muffles harmonics are hard to get to ring out as anyway. If you don't have the right tone, the right EQ, they just kind of get muffled. So I always make a bass patch with harmonics in mind. I want to make sure if I want to play one, it's going to be there. But you kind of have to pluck like this. Notice I'm not plucking through the string, I'm plucking away. And then when you do those low bass notes, you can have to switch back. So that's kind of what he's doing here. He's making just a really great forward-thinking bass part. I'd never really seen anybody do this until I got into Dream Theater.
I was told there's a new love that's born for each one that has died. I was told there'll be no one to call on when I feel alone and afraid. I was told if you dream of the next world, you'll find yourself swimming in a lake.
Start driving, he just goes into a groovy line now. And he's kind of establishing that groove back. I don't know the exact part. I used to know this song note for note. It's been a long time, but this is kind of what came in the beginning. So a lot of great writing in this song, and I just love how the bass isn't, in Dream Theater, it's just never been about being in the background. It's like, how can every instrument have their part? And, Dream Theater get a lot of hate for just being, I don't know, nerdy stuff. It's obviously niche music, but if you're a musician, like a real musician, I guess all musicians are real musicians, but I mean, if you're a musician who just likes the geeky stuff and the music theory and just the craftsmanship and the technique, I mean, if you just study this band, not even about if the songs are great or not, but if you just study the writing and how they compose, there's just so much to unearth, and I learned so much from this band.
There's a picture worth 1,000 words. A living stars from faces before me. It has a way.
Petrucci's just kind of playing just some open E chords. The bass is kind of taking the riff here with this. Whatever the exact riff is. Love the strings. Just so big. So good. Okay, things get interesting here. There's a lot to digest coming up. This is kind of the instrumental, very, very almost long-winded instrumental break that I love. There's so much just cool little nuggets of things going on between every instrument, but a lot on the bass. Let's keep going. Okay, I remember when I tried learning this song and did my best a long time ago. It's still very difficult. I quite never understood what he was doing here. Back in the old Ultimate Guitar days, there was 30 versions of a tab, and you had to almost piecemeal them to get kind of an accurate tab. But he's kind of just doing a mix of I can't even say the word percussive. He's doing a percussive mix of like what the melody and the chord progression. He's outlining two different things going on. So on the left hand, he's kind of following that chord progression. And he's kind of just doing this percussive thing. I think it's lining up with that keyboard thing. And I don't recall exactly what frets he's hitting. He's just kind of going. But he's changing the root note, so he's kind of keeping it unison on B. That kind of thing. This is kind of staying kind of stationary. He's changing the chord progression underneath it. Nonetheless, this opened my eyes to how two-hand tapping, where you can have a melody on top or kind of a more chordal thing, and you can kind of control the bass line underneath it, you know. That kind of stuff. It just got me thinking how two-hand tapping can just be really awesome if you kind of combine melody and kind of the chord progression at the bottom. Listen to how much is going on right now. I mean, you have an absolutely dense progressive metal mix. You have a bass with something that needs to cut through. Two-handed tapping. You have a guitar lead. You have, you know, Jordan Rudess doing thick pad key stuff. You have all this nuance in the percussion. Then you have an entire orchestra. I mean, again, like I said in the beginning, I can't understand the mixing of the post-production. It's almost like you have to bust the entire orchestra out to its own channel and just raise it when it comes in. But, you know, this is a great mix. I'm listening in ears, and it's brilliantly done. This part is always blows my mind. And he's doing chords there, the bass. I think there's a harmonic part here too. Back to that riff. This is a very air drummable part. Love it. I could do this all day. All right, here's that bass solo. All right, let's talk about what's going on there. Let's skip back a bit. And you know what? Out of everything John Myung's done, like even bass solo stuff, I'm not really crazy about this. I mean, I don't know what else would be there. It's another one of those. It might be just a permutation of what he was doing just a minute ago, but he's kind of going up F sharp, G, A, and B. And this is actually pretty difficult to do right because he's kind of doing 16th notes with these little like 30-second gallops in there. So real slow, it's. It's kind of hard to get right. Just the nature of this instrument to get that perfectly clean and just to get those. It's difficult. And I remember trying to learn this and not knowing how to make it not just like, because just you pounding on a bass like that, the pickups are just going to pick up this kind of ambient noise. And the trick is to actually mute all of the strings with your left hand. So this is done very intentionally. So you'll notice kind of when he's down here doing those octaves. And by the way, this was just like a 4-chord. I wouldn't call this chord, but it's just F sharp, G, A, and B. The same pattern all the way up. It all moves static. It's the exact same. But what he's doing is when he's fretting these octaves, he's kind of muting all of the strings. You've seen guitar players that play with a hair tie, sometimes around the strings if they're doing, I don't know, something tapping or just a lead. You'll see this in band studio videos a lot. That's just to mute the strings. Because, when you're doing some upper solo stuff on guitar, you're not really using open strings. I mean, you may, but, for a lead that's way up here, you're probably not. So it helps just to deaden all that ambient noise that the strings can just start to ring out after a while. And then you put compressors on it, EQ, and all of a sudden it sounds really muddy. But you can do that without a hair tie, especially in a setting like this where it's in the middle of the song. There's no way you wouldn't really want to slide a hair tie up just to play that and put it back down. I've seen that done as well. But by, fretting the octaves like this, I'm kind of covering these upper strings with my index finger on this low F sharp. So when I go down to fret that low F sharp, these are dead. That way when I tap stuff up here, there's no ringing out. Versus if I were to fret it more like you would fret a scale, you're kind of just going on top of the string and pushing it down where these are still open. So when you do this two-hand tapping stuff, you always kind of want to keep your other extraneous fingers around to kind of help mute. So when he frets those octaves, these other strings are dead. Well, I'm fretting this one, but you get the idea of these other strings. So I guess it'd be B, E, or B, A, and G. And it helps just to keep all the strings dead. So when you do this, that little 30-second gallop, you kind of have to really hit pretty hard to make those speak. And you wouldn't want all your strings ringing out. But if you want to learn this bass solo, it's very simple. It's just index and pinky on the left hand, and he's using index and ring on the left hand and doing that gallop by just double tapping with the middle finger. So once again, if I were to kind of go all the way up, 4 octaves. That's the hardest part of the whole thing, just getting those little double gallops to speak. And I'm kind of also using the bottom of my hand here to kind of mute this B string because, once again, let me show you. Let me pound on the bass. The first string you're going to hear ring out is that B string. And that, playing a 6-string bass, he's going to have that problem. So, but back to what I was saying, it's just kind of like a percussive ostinato. The hits are kind of, I think, just as much of an important compositional part as that bass solo. But people love it. This is a classic Dream Theater part. If you're a bass player who follows John Myung, who's into Dream Theater, you know exactly how just revered this solo is. And I think a big part of it was just nobody was really doing that. And, guys like John just opened the door for bass players to have all these creative techniques that are out today. Watch it again. And I guess I did say he was using the index and pinky for the left hand. But you can clearly see right here, if you look at my mouse, you can kind of see that finger is laid over those strings. Same here, look at the index. It's laid over those strings. And you time it just right to where you don't have any extraneous noise happening. Now, when I play the video, it's really hard to see it in action, but you can kind of see just the way his hand is held. He's not like this. He's kind of like this. He's kind of slanted just to cover that ground, and that's why it's able to be kind of clean. It's cool. Sounds like Sonic the Hedgehog. I've seen that comment a lot. He's just holding down the octaves here. This is another one of those weird parts that I don't understand the slap part of it. I guess it's just a strike, the E string, but that passage, I guess, kind of slow is. I don't know exactly how he's muting that slap string. I mean, if you kind of look right here, he could be throwing his palm down. It's kind of hard to watch in the context of a bunch of different multi-angle cameras going on. And, I think when I learned this song, I had to kind of do it a different way. I think I just went, I don't know what I did. I might have used this bottom string. There's a couple different ways you could play it, but it looks cool the way he's playing it. He's kind of slapping. And I can't play it fast. I would have to kind of work this back up again. But he's following the unison, and I guess as a bass player, hitting that open string and jumping to two-hand tapping is just easier to kind of execute. He kind of brings it back here with a little stop and rhythm and change. Weird solo. Now that I think about it, he might be striking kind of through it, just kind of like, instead of actually slapping it, it might just kind of be putting his hand into place, which is, I could see that being possible. It's interesting part, kind of a finger twister. That will forever be the weirdest keyboard part. Just, I don't know if that's just running up a bunch of diminished stuff. There's a lot of accidentals there, but I always thought this was the most unique. This is Kevin Moore era. Kevin Moore did some just really brilliant stuff, and so does Jordan Rudess, so did Derek Sherinian. But again, the stuff you find on Images and Words just is very deep musically, just why it might work. Really cool stuff. And if you go back to this little part here, you can kind of see him doing what I call a rake through technique. Let me see if I can find it. Right here, I think. So I have a book called Guide to Right Hand Technique that has a whole chapter on this. And again, I even learned about this stuff being possible from just watching every Dream Theater thing I could back in my formative years. But it's kind of like economy picking a guitar where you're using the same finger to rake through. I don't remember the fretting of this note. I know it's kind of chromatic. But instead of plucking each note individually with a different finger, you can kind of rake down. So, I can play this pretty fast just with my index finger. And that's a good way to get these fast passages where you're not having to reset a new finger every time. You can just kind of rake it through. And it kind of works for this line because he's kind of going, for instance, ring finger on the A string back down to this A flat G chromatic down. It's just a very economy of motion thing. He's great at it. All right, so because I know what's coming up next, I'm just going to say that when I was teaching students very heavily, probably 8 to 10 years ago, anytime a student will come up to me and say, do you have an exercise that can just absolutely obliterate my forearm, my fretting hand muscles, and truthfully, my plucking hand too? And for a while, I would kind of write something that I thought, and of course, I released a right hand technique book, plucking hand technique book, around the same time, and I had some great exercises in that. But this was around the time I worked some parts of this song back up just for fun, and I realized, what an absolute monster, gnarly line this is. And I'm sure I can't complain as a bass player because Petrucci and Rudess are playing it as well. But one of the things that struck me about it was that it was very reminiscent of times when I was playing in theater. I was in the pit at some point playing locally for plays like Sister Act, Jesus Christ Superstar. And a thing I would notice is that on those theater-type productions, sometimes the bass parts would be very wonky, like the fretting, the note choices wouldn't make any sense. And I kind of figured out eventually that it was like, oh, this must be written by a piano player who wasn't thinking consciously of the limitations of the fretboard. And it creates some really interesting fretting challenges, but it's a chore to play. An example would be there's one part in Jesus Christ Superstar, somewhere in there I remember, there was like a little 16th note run that was all in fourths. So on a piano, C to F to B flat to E flat, that's fourths. If you were to just play a little 4-note grouping like that, da-ga-da-ga, and it's just, you play it exactly like my hand looks, da-ga-da-ga. But on a fretboard tuned in fourths, it's ridiculously hard, if not impossible, to play cleanly and not feel awkward. That would kind of look like this. And in the context of, other things going around it, that's just not something a guitar or a bass player would write. So I kind of learned, okay, this makes sense now. A composer is composing and seeing the big picture. They're not worried about the fretboard convenience for the bass player, like way down on the, the score. And I've been hyper aware of that ever since. And fast forward, I once read in an interview that John Petrucci tries to shy away from playing some Dream Theater songs live because there was these keyboard unisons with guitar that Rudess wrote on piano, and to translate them to guitar was just very laborious. I think Blind Faith, which is another one of my favorite Dream Theater songs, it's kind of toward the end. If you know that song, it's a really fast, ridiculously sounding, just challenging keyboard guitar unison. I mean, they're all probably ridiculously hard to play, but there's an interview out there somewhere where he talks about that, and it kind of reminded me that this is probably possible in a lot of band settings. And I always wondered if this particular line here in Metropolis had some elements of that because, I only remember the first couple bars, and we'll play it here in a second, but I remember the higher you get on this part, it's some weird stuff. You'll kind of notice Myung is kind of turning his hand to fret 2 different notes on the same fret on different strings. And just in context of a really busy technical line, it's not something a guitar player or a bass player would gravitate toward if they were writing it. So maybe Kevin Moore wrote this part. I'm honestly not sure. And maybe they wrote it just because they're, gluttons for punishment. I don't know. But if you want to burn your forearm out, this section right here I'm about to play, I can't think of anything better ever that I've ever heard. Let's check it out. As it goes up, it's harder and harder. Watch his fingers. You can kind of see for a second there, he turned his hand to kind of get one of these kind of things. And again, I don't remember the exact fretting parts, but if we go back to the kind of beginning part of this riff, so I guess it's here in this blackout. I'm gonna let it play out till we get there. So this riff kind of starts, it's not too bad, this first part. It's not too bad at first. There's a little bit of position shifting that is kind of awkward to play. It's this next part. There's like some major 6 jumps. And again, that's something on a keyboard. It's just like C to A. But on a bass, it's you either have to go fret 3 on the A string to fret 7 on the D string. But at this speed, or you'd have to do it like this, which is kind of the way I would play it. So the first part, it repeats that 3 or 4 times. And then this kind of next part is constantly changing, goes higher and higher up the fretboard, and these positions keep reoccurring that are just awkward to play. There's some 4th jumps, there's some major dominant 7 jumps, so skipping a string on the same fret, 2 strings apart. But this next part, that major 6 jump, just why? And then I think the next part is something like... And I know there's a G to A, so low G on the fret 3 on the E string, up to that A. So once again, you'd have to be doing a 5-fret jump if it were the other way around. Or you'd have to do... Which is still bizarre because you're skipping 2 strings. Again, not too bad if you were just moving whole notes, but again, something at this speed, it doesn't make any sense. So... this is, I can't think of a riff that's harder on your fretting hand than this right here. I mean, hats off to these guys. I can't keep up. Just watch John Myung's fingers here. You'll kind of see him switch. Right there. Woo! Brings it back down. Yeah, I think there's a video on my Instagram from a long time ago where I worked this up because I had kind of figured out that this is gnarly. I've got to learn it just to say I did. And I remember those first 3 bars, but yeah, this is crazy. And again, I'm talking everything just on the fretting hand, the plucking hand. You're skipping strings. It's fast. It's odd meter. It's a lot of 2 plus 3 plus 2. I mean, just executing all of that by yourself is nuts, and then doing it with, 4 or 3 other musicians and an orchestra. I mean, how can you not look at this and be like, this is the epitome of like rock and metal musicianship? There is no other way to slice it. So, I've seen this DVD, I want to say 1,000 times. If I'm not being hyperbolic, I would say I've probably watched this whole DVD 35, 40 times, which is a lot, and it blows me away every time. I'm blown away right now just seeing it again. So, this band will always have such a special place in my heart, just, showing me what can be possible in a band. And man, what an inspiration. Look at that stick throw. Love this key change. Great writing. Yeah, look at that.
Thank you, New York! This is
hell of a crowd.
A memorable evening for us
It's got to be
Thanks
amazing.
for making the magic and keeping that dream alive. Good night.
So there you have it, Metropolis Part 1. This is from their landmark kind of breakout album, Images and Words. And this is just an absolute showcase of everything possible with the instrument. I was going to say there's no slap, but he slapped some notes in there. So you've got two-handed tapping, you have harmonics, you have just ridiculous synchronization of both hands, raking, 3-finger technique at fast speeds, crazy time signatures. That's just the bass part. I didn't even dive into the difficulty of the vocals, the drumming, the guitar parts, the keyboard parts, and then just to put an entire orchestra behind it. It will never not blow me away. And again, as I said before, this band will always hold a special place for me. Just showed me what was possible in a band. And at an early age, picking up the bass, I got into Pink Floyd, Zeppelin, then it was Metallica, and then it was Dream Theater. And I was like, oh my gosh. And, hats off. Like, you cannot deny just I don't even know how to put it into words. Just unbelievable. This is my, this wall back here. If I can point in reverse, this wall kind of holds a vinyl copy of the top 10 albums that influenced me as a bass player. And maybe I'll do a video on that someday. But up at spot number 1, it's right above here. Let's see if I can throw in a photo. It's a limited edition, orange edition of Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory, which is sort of the epilogue to this song. This is one song on one album, then they made an entire concept album based around this song. sort of as an extension. Anyway, that is the number one spot. I absorbed that album over and over and over again. I still listen to it to this day. It's an amazing record. But I wanted to go back to this just because of the live video of it. And what can I say? Metropolis Part 1. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you're subscribed. Please comment. Let me know what you'd like to see next. Please like the video. Just one click, but it certainly helps channels like mine really get out there to the masses. And I'm having a blast doing these, and I hope you are having a blast watching them. We'll see you next week. Cheers. Have a great week.